Hello, welcome to my home and my home office. My name is Eric Lassie. I'm a community pathologist, and our presentation today is on digital pathology sponsored by Leica Biosystems. I'll be joined by Dr. Matthew Hanna from Memorial Sloan Kettering, and he and I will talk about the rise of digital pathology in the time of COVID. We're all set. Come on, join us. As I said, my name is Eric Lassie. I am a community pathologist, part of Affiliated Pathologists Medical Group. I'm also a governor of the College of American Pathologists, past president of the Digital Pathology Association, and a trustee of the American Board of Pathology. In this introduction, I will cover how COVID-19 has affected my practice, as well as some of the regulatory issues around primary diagnosis and remote sign-out. I will then close with a cautionary tale about the hazards of social distancing in pathology. I am a member of Affiliated Pathologists Medical Group, which is composed of 40 pathologists covering 21 service areas in California, Oregon, and Phoenix. We also have a private anatomic pathology lab called Affiliated Lab, and that's where I spend much of my time. Early this year, the pandemic struck and wreaked havoc across the world. Many pathologists experienced a dramatic fall in case volume. My lab is no exception. As you can see from the graph, our caseload began dropping in February, and we saw a 70% drop in volume. Fortunately, things have stabilized since then. March 13th is a special date. If you do a Google search, you'll get a list of some important events that occurred over the centuries. Many are not that memorable. But for me, that date has special significance. It is the day that Dr. Susie Dintzes sent me an email. Dr. Dintzes is a pathologist at the University of Washington and a good friend. This is what she wrote. As Seattle is shutting down, I'm wondering if I could have a quick chat with you about telepathology rules and regulations. The University of Washington and Washington State Society of Pathologists is wondering how we might be able to use remote diagnostic services effectively and legally. March 13th is also the date that President Trump declared a national emergency around the COVID-19 disease outbreak. When I first received the email for Dr. Dintzes, I was on a conference call with other governors of the College of American Pathologists. We were discussing regulatory issues and the COVID-19 outbreak. I raised the questions that Dr. Dintzes had expressed. There was a call to action, and within 6 hours, the Washington office of the CAP drafted a letter to CMS asking for flexibility in the CLIA licensing requirement for remote sign-out of pathology. CAP members also drafted a white paper guidance document, which was used to gather congressional support for this initiative. 30 members of Congress signed on, and within short order, the CMS issued regulatory enforcement discretion. What this means is that the CMS temporarily waived the requirement for remote locations to have a CLIA license when performing primary diagnosis using either glass or digital slides, as long as the main healthcare location has a certificate. The waiver also includes cytology, review of clinical pathology data such as gel electrophoresis, FISH, flow cytometry, HLA data, and the like. A few days later, the FDA also issued its own guidance document, which focused on the off-label use of digital pathology scanners. The waiver states that non-FDA cleared digital pathology systems can be promoted for remote primary diagnosis. The FDA emphasized that these systems must be validated. There are currently 2 FDA-cleared systems on the market, one from Philips and one from Leica. Both require medical-grade monitors. With the waiver, pathologists can use their own less expensive commercial monitors, such as laptop displays, to view whole slide images and perform primary diagnosis. Now I need to emphasize a couple of points around the FDA enforcement discretion. First, the FDA regulates manufacturers. It does not regulate pathologists or the practice of medicine. Second, pathologists, under this enforcement discretion, can perform primary diagnosis, frozen sections, and the like using any non-cleared device as long as it is properly validated. A system that is already validated in the hospital must go through some form of validation, even if abbreviated, to verify that it performs as expected in the remote location. Now let's take a look at the differences between the FDA and CMS regarding diagnostic oversight. The FDA regulates medical device manufacturers. The CMS regulates clinical laboratory testing. The FDA reviews claims made by manufacturers to ensure that the medical devices are safe and effective. CMS, for its part, wants to be sure that the testing is accurate. The FDA focuses on all labs that use the medical device. CMS focuses on a single lab that is performing the test. Finally, the FDA scrutinizes how the device is labeled and marketed, while CMS exercises its oversight through the laboratory inspection process. Now let's look at how these waivers are affecting pathology. Manufacturers are the ones impacted by FDA guidance. They can now market non-cleared devices for off-label use, in this case, primary diagnosis. On the CMS side, a CLIA license is no longer needed for remote primary diagnosis. The result is that whole slide scanning systems can now be promoted without the need for FDA clearance. For pathologists and laboratories, the CMS waiver brings greater flexibility. Many pathologists can now safely sign out glass and digital slides from remote locations such as a home office. The waiver also applies to cytology and other clinical laboratory interpretations. These waivers are temporary and will probably be lifted once the pandemic abates. Under the new guidance, the FDA still requires that the systems be properly validated and verified. Though CLIA licensing has been relaxed, CMS still wants proper policies and procedures in place. IT support must be adequate, and attention must be given to any HIPAA violations. The pathology community has responded to the FDA waiver by publishing journal articles about remote sign-out during the pandemic. There is also an initiative to collect real-world data that hopefully will show the equivalence of signing out cases using either glass slides or digital whole slide images. The Digital Pathology Association and the CAP are looking at continuing their dialogue with CMS around these regulations. So with that regulatory background, where are we now? I love this quote from Teddy Roosevelt. Do what you can, where you are, with what you have. That certainly applies to what we're experiencing now with COVID-19 pandemic. As an example, I want to explain my current work situation. Let me give you a quick tour of where I work. This is Affiliated Lab. We have some whole slide image scanners, and here is the immunohistochemistry department where I spend most of my time. Now down a hallway of offices, and near the end is my office, where, before COVID-19, I spent much of my day reviewing cases and doing a variety of other projects. Affiliated Lab is located in Southern California, and the commute from my home is about 45 minutes, which is pretty good for LA traffic. With COVID-19, I now have transferred all my work from my laboratory to my home, and I don't have a CLIA license. It's not much of a nerve center, but I can be pretty productive here. It's only about 19 miles between my home and Affiliated Lab. I now work nearly entirely digitally. My workload consists of breast marker and mismatch repair gene analyses and some primary diagnosis. In terms of hospital meetings, pretty much everything is now virtual. We have virtual tumor boards and medical staff meetings. A few are hybrid. I also do work on a variety of 510(k) projects and other consultations. If you plan to do remote sign-out, or even if you are already doing it, I would point you to a CAP website resource. There is a web page devoted to COVID-19, and on the page is an FAQ document which answers many questions about remote sign-out. Some of the topics include validation, verification and training, the importance of IT support, security, QA programs for remote sign-out, and HIPAA. Regarding HIPAA, Patient privacy issues are always a concern, but even more so at a remote location that may not be as secure as a hospital or laboratory office. Pathologists must be certain that patient information on a computer screen, on slide labels, patient requisitions, and the like cannot be easily accessed and viewed by unauthorized individuals. It really is not appropriate to have patient information strewn across the kitchen table if that's where you're working. Patient confidentiality must be maintained. So what is the impact of COVID-19 on the future of digital pathology? Well, it certainly has given it a boost. Telepathology is probably the best return on investment for a digital pathology system. Remote digital sign-out has also highlighted some real needs. Pathologists demand an efficient workflow. We want the experience to be as frictionless as possible. Pathology hardware and software vendors must rise to the occasion and give us proper tools so that we can sign out our cases quickly and efficiently. In addition, we need a better input device than a mouse or even a laptop trackpad. It is definitely challenging to spend your entire day navigating digital images on a big screen monitor. Dr. Hanna will discuss this in his upcoming talk. With COVID-19, it's like we're in the middle of a worldwide feasibility study regarding the use of digital pathology. We need to collect real-world data to show that glass and digital are equivalent and that medical-grade monitors are not required. Finally, I want to again emphasize the importance of validating these systems properly. And speaking of validation, I'm going to pivot to Dr. Matthew Hanna. I will summarize his accomplishments by saying that he has strong interests in clinical and pathology informatics as well as breast pathology. I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Hanna on the CAP Informatics Committee as well as the Artificial Intelligence Work Group. It's really remarkable how much he has accomplished in his young career, including a seminal paper published in Modern Pathology. The paper is entitled Validation of a Digital Pathology System, including Remote View During the COVID-19 Pandemic. The paper will be the centerpiece of his talk as he relates the challenges he experienced with the COVID-19 pandemic and the rise of digital pathology. I'll be back at the end for a few closing comments about the perils pathologists face when they adopt social distancing. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hanna, for that terrific discussion. In closing, I just have one more thing I want to add. Since that CMS waiver, many pathologists are taking advantage of the sign-out flexibility and minimizing their exposure to the COVID-19 virus. They no longer have to travel to work and unnecessarily expose themselves to the circulating virus, which would put them, their coworkers, and their families at risk, and also put patients at risk for delayed care should they be unable to diagnose cases due to illness or quarantine. Digital pathology has certainly proven its worth in the midst of this pandemic. But with this opportunity comes risks, not from COVID-19 or misdiagnoses or HIPAA violations, rather risks to our professional stature and relationship with colleagues. That is the risk of social distancing for pathologists. I can sum it up with this quote: "Don't act remote when you are remote." Here's what I mean by that. Pathologists are the nerds of medicine. Before there was Google, our clinical colleagues came to us for answers about what tests to order and how to interpret them. As pathologists, we are experts at seeing, but we are not good at being seen. We are often invisible. Now, if you look up the word remote in the dictionary, you will see two sets of definitions. One is far away, distant, isolated, secluded. The other is aloof, detached, uncommunicative, and introverted. The message is, don't act aloof when you are working from a distance. During this pandemic, and as digital pathology becomes more widely adopted, we pathologists must make liberal use of phone calls to our clinicians about cases and actively engage when attending virtual meetings. We need to reach out on a regular basis. We need to be as visible as possible. Let's face it, we pathologists often engaged in social distancing well before COVID-19 broke out. As a specialty, We are not known for our interpersonal skills or extroverted style. We often suffer from the stigma of not being a real participant on the patient care team, preferring instead to be office-bound. We seem to be naturals at this social distancing thing. But we cannot allow the pandemic to make things worse and reinforce this stereotype. Remote sign-out means that there is even less chance for interaction with colleagues. It is important that we don't let that happen. And after this pandemic abates and we take off our masks, when our clinical colleagues gather together to discuss patients, we should not be missing in action. We should not use COVID-19 as an excuse to disengage. We need to actively re-engage with our medical staff, administration, and other members of the healthcare team. Remote sign-out should not be seen as an excuse to avoid our responsibilities as pathologists. We want to end up in a better place with even more respect because of our virtual and on-site activities. To paraphrase what Teddy Roosevelt said, in these difficult times, we need to make the most of the situation, do the best we can, and absolutely, positively stay engaged. Here is a list of references that you might find of value, including Dr. Hanna's paper. And finally, I'll close with one more quote. Sometimes you find yourself in the middle of chaos, and sometimes in the middle of chaos, you find yourself. In the middle of this pandemic, digital pathology has truly found itself, and it has risen to the occasion. COVID-19 has seen the rise of digital pathology. And now Dr. Hanna and I are ready to answer your questions. Thank you.